Anime, Classroom for Heroes. In this first episode, we are shown two figures engaged in a battle in a desolate land. They are a hero and a demon king who will determine the fate of this world. The demon king chants a meteor spell aimed at the hero. Meanwhile, the hero merely takes a small stone and throws it with all his might using magic. The small stone successfully shatters the giant meteor into pieces. The hero asks the demon king to fight seriously. The demon king agrees to end this battle immediately. He unleashes his full power to attack. Meanwhile, the hero uses his ultimate move, the Dragon Annihilator, a technique that destroys dragons with 5 swords. Their movements are so fast and powerful that they even cause the surrounding land to crumble. Despite fighting with their full strength, both of them remain undefeated. However, they are now extremely exhausted. The hero's black hair has turned white. In the end, they continue to advance, gasping for breath, and they stab each other's bodies. Thus, both of them fall down. The scene then shifts to a castle that serves as an academy. There is a boy dressed differently from the others. The boy has unusual hair, with the right side white and the left side black. The boy is impressed by the students greeting each other. He is determined to find friends and become ordinary. Apparently, the boy is a transfer student. In the school hallway, the boy greets every student he sees. Some students are curious about him, and the boy approaches them quickly. He introduces himself to them. His name is Blade. The 4 students that Blade approached also introduce themselves. There's Kasim, Clay, Jessica, and Claire. Blade says he came here to find friends. Claire offers the 4 of them to become his friends. Blade is overjoyed because he has successfully made 4 friends. His goal is to have 100 friends. Soon, a girl with red hair approaches Blade because he is being too noisy. The girl is Arnest Flaming, one of the top-ranking students commonly referred to as Empress. Blade doesn't care about that and instead introduces himself to Arnest as well. Arnest becomes angry, especially since Blade's face looks unfamiliar. Claire explains that Blade is a transfer student. However, Arnest does not believe it. Rosewood Academy is a special school for people who want to become heroes and protect the world. It's impossible for a student to join in the middle of the semester. Blade says that he doesn't care much about being a hero, he just wants to find friends. Arnest becomes even angrier upon hearing this. Then, Blade suddenly remembers that he has to meet the headmaster. He asks Arnest to take him there reluctantly. They finally arrived in front of the headmaster's office door. As they entered, Arnest immediately knelt down, not expecting to see the figure before her. Blade simply stood and spoke familiarly with that person. The man standing before them was the king of this kingdom. Blade himself already knew that the man was the king. The king said that he had heard a lot about Arnest from the previous headmaster. As he stated, from now on, the king would be the headmaster of this academy. Upon hearing this, Arnest praised him, honored to be taught directly by a great warrior. However, for now, the king only had business with Blade. He asked Arnest to leave the room. When they were outside, Arnest became angry again because Blade was acting familiar with the king. In fact, Blade himself didn't know why the king was there. The king said he wanted Blade's power to return. However, Blade just wanted to be an ordinary person. The king even went as far as changing the academy's curriculum. Blade felt that it was unnecessary. Besides, the demon king was no longer there. According to the king's report, the powers of the hero and the demon king were lost when they exchanged attacks. However, the king believed that his power could rise again. A few moments later, Blade met Arnest again. He wondered why Blade was here when this was the arena for the top-ranking class. It turned out that after taking the lower-ranking class exam, Blade was told to come here. He even showed his top-ranking class emblem. Arnest clearly didn't believe that a transfer student suddenly entered the top-ranking class. Arnest accused him of bribing or using a backdoor entrance. Setting aside those accusations, Blade, as usual, introduced himself to everyone present. Arnest was angry because he wasn't being listened to. However, Blade said that he was listening while patting Arnest's head. Because of that, Arnest became embarrassed and swung her sword. Blade was able to easily dodge her attack, but the impact of the attack was powerful enough to erode the arena wall. Shortly after, a girl with white hair approached Blade and Arnest to inform them that class was about to begin. Blade introduced himself once again. The girl was unsure of how to react. According to Arnest, she just needed to introduce herself in return. The girl agreed and introduced herself as Sophie. Still feeling uncertain, Arnest asked the teacher for permission to test Blade's abilities before the lesson began. Arnest wanted to test him by attacking magical metal. According to Arnest, everyone in the top-ranking class could scratch the magical metal. So, Blade had to make a stronger impact if he wanted to be recognized in this class. Arnest said that the top-ranking class existed in a different dimension. Blade asked back how many dimensions were different. Arnest didn't expect Blade to ask that, so she simply answered randomly, saying 3 dimensions. Blade then knew what technique he would use. The other students recognized the stances created by Blade. Then, Blade used the Dragon Eater, a technique that destroys dragons with 2 swords. Not only did he scratch the metal, but the attacked magical metal also completely shattered. His attack continued, destroying part of the arena wall. After witnessing his ability, Arnest became curious about who Blade really was. He answered that he was just an ordinary person, and that was one of the reasons he came to this academy. During lunch break, Blade approached Arnest, who was eating alone. Blade invited others to sit at their table, but they hesitated because Arnest was there. It seemed that she was feared by other students. Despite that, Blade thanked Arnest. As a transfer student, Blade felt grateful to have found a friend like Arnest. Arnest herself did not expect to be seen that way by him. However, Blade said that they were friends, especially since they were eating together. Arnest became shy and accepted Blade's statement. It was already nighttime, and Arnest had just returned to her room. Earlier, Arnest seemed to disregard Blade's words. However, when she was alone, she was actually overjoyed because it was the first time she had made a friend. While she was feeling happy, Arnest suddenly felt a great fire from within her. Unable to control it, she immediately fainted. Blade took her to the academy's infirmary. When they arrived, the nurse there said it was beyond her capabilities. She could handle ordinary illnesses or injuries, but dealing with magical diseases or curses was different. Sometime later, Arnest finally regained consciousness. Blade helped her walk because she was still weak. However, when they reached a group of other students, Arnest insisted on walking alone. In addition, she asked Blade not to tell anyone that she had fainted. Later that night, Blade went to a room that appeared to be secret. There were many robot guards there, but Blade defeated them all. Afterward, he opened a door by inserting a crystal. The door led to a modern room that looked like a database. Blade searched for information about something in Rosewood Academy, specifically information about Arnest's sword, Asmodeus. After obtaining the desired information, he planned to talk to Arnest the next day. Blade revealed that he knew the secret of Arnest's sword. The sword had its own consciousness and could grant great power to its owner. However, currently, Arnest was an imperfect owner. Blade asked why her condition was like that. Reluctantly, Arnest had to tell him. When she was 6 years old, she touched the cursed magic sword kept by the Flaming family. The bloodthirsty will of the sword tried to take over her body. Since then, Arnest had always resisted it. Her hair, which was originally black, turned red because of it. Even now, Arnest still often heard whispers from Asmodeus, but Asmodeus itself did not control her. Arnest knew there was a way to solve this problem, which was to convince the sword that she was its rightful owner. However, Arnest was worried that a bloodthirsty demon would be born if she failed. If that were to happen, Blade said he would defeat the demon. Moreover, he believed that Arnest would succeed. After that, Arnest challenged the sword, Asmodeus, to establish a pact. For that, she had to be tested first. A fire tornado formed around Arnest. Currently, Arnest was fighting Asmodeus mentally. Outside the tornado, fire demons started causing havoc. However, they were no match for Blade. Meanwhile, Arnest was determined to win, especially after being trusted by Blade. The fire tornado grew bigger, but it did not intimidate Blade at all. He believed that Arnest could pass her test. Shortly after, the fire tornado vanished, and Arnest fell from it. She stood up again and successfully conquered the Asmodeus sword. After overcoming her long-standing problem, Arnest slightly changed her appearance and became more cheerful. Other students were even more amazed by her presence. This is the end of episode 1. Continuing to episode 2, Blade is currently sparring with 2 students simultaneously. However, he keeps evading their attacks and appears not to take the fight seriously. Observing this, Arnest reprimands Blade, stating that it is impolite to avert one's gaze during a fight. However, instead of responding to Arnest's advice, Blade becomes distracted, feeling that Arnest seems somewhat different. Nevertheless, when asked what is different, Blade has no idea at all. Arnest becomes slightly disappointed that Blade doesn't notice her hair. Afterward, since Blade is feeling bored at the moment, Arnest asks him to supervise Sophie's training. For some reason, Sophie has always been training alone. When given an order, she will indeed obey. However, Sophie has never done anything according to her own desires. Interestingly, the other day Sophie mentioned her own name to Blade. So, perhaps Blade can help her. Subsequently, Blade approaches Sophie and tells her that he came because Arnest instructed him to. Sophie asks if it was an order. Blade becomes somewhat confused about how to respond, but essentially, he wants to assist Sophie. However, Sophie says she can only fight barehanded because that's the only thing she was taught. Blade is willing to teach her sword techniques, not as an order, but because he considers her a friend. Since it's not an order, Blade won't force her. Sophie doesn't seem to mind this offer. However, just as Blade is about to start, the bell for break time rings. In the next lesson, they finally get to practice swordsmanship together. In the first attempt, Sophie is unable to even scratch the enchanted metal and gets thrown back. Blade asks her to focus her energy on the sword and consider it as an extension of her body. After that, Blade demonstrates by effortlessly slicing through the enchanted metal as if it were paper. With that somewhat ambiguous explanation, somehow Sophie manages to understand it. After a few hours, Sophie is now able to strike the enchanted metal with the sword without any issues. With that, Blade concludes their training for now. Suddenly, Sophie asks if by doing this, she can defeat Arnest. Honestly, Blade is not sure either. If it's just these techniques alone, it seems challenging. Then, she throws her sword and assumes a mount position towards Blade, stating that this technique is much stronger. Although she says so, Sophie mentions that she wants to be taught something new the next day. Blade is currently in the school's headmaster's office, asking about Blade's school life. The headmaster is glad to hear that Blade has friends, considering Blade has been a hero since the age of 3. The headmaster asks Blade about the name of his friend. There are actually several people, but Blade responds that he has been hanging out with Sophie lately. The headmaster already suspected that Blade would be interested in her. The headmaster mentions that Sophie is very strong, and Blade agrees. However, it turns out that Sophie is still not perfect. According to the headmaster, if she were perfect, her abilities would surpass Blade's. Blade doesn't understand what the headmaster means by that. The headmaster suspects that Blade already knows that Sophie is the subject of the artificial hero project. The project leaders believe that they could create someone equivalent to a hero. Using forbidden techniques lost in the past, they used human forms as a basis to create artificial hero abilities. Furthermore, they duplicated it repeatedly and enhanced its abilities. Sophie's full name is Sophitia Femto. Femto itself means 12. In other words, Sophie is currently the 12th duplication. All this time, Sophie has been treated as a research subject. Nevertheless, the headmaster assures Blade not to worry because he has destroyed the organization. While saving Sophie, the headmaster declared that Sophie is now free. However, Sophie simply asks if it is an order. The headmaster is confident that Sophie continues to behave that way until now. After hearing all that, Blade immediately leaves the room to find Sophie. He believes that Sophie's suffering is caused by her existence. He wants to restore Sophie's normal life. Unfortunately, Blade himself doesn't know what normal looks like. Firstly, Blade meets the nurse at the health center and asks what is considered normal for young people his age. The nurse teases him a bit, saying she will teach him the beauty of youth. However, Blade quickly assumes that youth is the answer. Next, he goes to Leonard to ask about the meaning of youth. Leonard himself is also confused about how to answer, but when discussing youth, love is undoubtedly the answer. Just like before, Blade immediately assumes that love is the answer. Then, Blade asks Claire and Jessica about the meaning of love. They didn't expect Blade to ask such a question. With some embarrassment, Claire answers that love usually involves dating. Once again, Blade jumps to the conclusion that dating is the answer. Lastly, he goes to Arnest's room and asks what dating means and what should be done. Arnest answers that typical dating activities involve having a conversation, strolling around the city, and going shopping. However, Arnest misunderstands that Blade is asking her out on a date. Satisfied with the answer, Blade leaves Arnest and says he is going on a date. Arnest is confused, but then she realizes that Blade wants to ask someone else out on a date. Without any shame, Blade barges into the women's changing room and straightforwardly asks Sophie out on a date. As usual, Sophie asks if it is an order. Of course, it is not an order. Blade considers it to be something very important. Sophie agrees to go on a date with him. The next day, Blade arrives early at the designated meeting place and is currently waiting for Sophie. From a distance, Arnest, Claire, and Jessica are observing Blade. The clock strikes exactly 10 o'clock, and Sophie arrives on time. Blade has learned a lot in preparation for this day. He has even written down a minute-by-minute schedule of activities. Arnest and the others feel that his plan is too detailed, more like a mission than a date. As Blade reads his plan for too long, he ends up messing up his own schedule by a few minutes. Sophie suggests that they just leave right away. Unexpectedly, they hold each other's arms like a couple. Arnest feels that their actions are too indecent. However, Jessica thinks it's still normal. Amidst the commotion, they lose track of Blade and Sophie. During their date, Blade and Sophie walk around the city, eat ice cream together, and enjoy the view from a bridge. On the bridge, there's an attraction where they can feed the fish. Sophie expresses her interest in trying it. They buy a box of fish food and pour it all into the river. Unbeknownst to them, the food falls on Arnest, Claire, and Jessica, who are hiding underwater. Later, they go to an arcade. There, they choose to play a boxing game. However, their strength is too powerful, and the game machine immediately breaks. Blade and Sophie simply leave afterward. Arnest and the others apologize to the arcade owner for Blade and Sophie's actions. Next, they arrive at a cafe and order drinks with couple-like straws. As they start sipping their drinks, Sophie asks Blade to come closer because she's having trouble sipping. Blade leans in until their cheeks touch. They are completely unaware that Arnest, Claire, and Jessica are at the next table. And of course, Arnest, witnessing the intimacy between Blade and Sophie, feels extremely embarrassed to the point of almost going insane. Unbeknownst to them, Blade and Sophie have once again disappeared from there. After that, they proceed to the next item on their schedule. Unfortunately, they are running a bit late from the predetermined time. Sophie suggests taking a shortcut instead. They then swiftly jump from one building to another. The sun has set, and they have reached their final destination, the legendary fountain. Blade heard about this place from others, but he doesn't understand what makes it legendary. Sophie feels the same way. Sophie smiles slightly and mentions that today has been very enjoyable. However, she wonders why Blade went through all this trouble. With a serious expression, Blade answers that it's because Sophie is his friend. Sophie has heard that friends don't keep secrets. This statement causes Blade to panic a bit. However, Sophie meant that she herself still has secrets. Sophie finally opens up and reveals her story. She explains that she is different from regular humans. She was born as an artificial hero. An imperfect research subject. Sophie was bestowed with the power of an artificial hero. She demonstrates this by touching a staircase, causing it to twist like a worm. Just like a genuine hero's power, Sophie can defy the laws of physics. Another example is her ability to manipulate gravity and time. However, her control is not perfect. Currently, Sophie can only use her power for 10 seconds. Her full name is Sophidia Femto. In other words, she is the 12th duplication of a girl named Sophidia. The final experiment of the Artificial Hero Project. After hearing Sophie reveal all her secrets, Blade also wants to disclose his secret. Blade confesses that he is the hero. More precisely, a former hero. He has lost his powers now. Since their first meeting, Sophie has always felt something familiar within Blade. Blade apologizes for everything Sophie has experienced and assures her that he doesn't mind if she hates him. After all, Sophie was born with that cursed power because of the existence of the hero. Truthfully, Blade himself never desired to be a hero. However, because he could save many people, he felt compelled to do so. He has been fighting since the age of 3. Although he hasn't always been successful in saving others, people would get angry if someone couldn't be saved. Sophie immediately embraces Blade, who is shedding tears. Sophie recounts that after being saved by the king, she wanted to find her true self. During that time, she saw many people and cities that were helped by the hero. Sophie asks Blade to take more pride in his accomplishments. Blade feels that it's impossible. Sophie doesn't force Blade, but it's clear that she is proud to be born as an artificial hero. She even wants to become like Blade. After hearing all of this, Blade accepts himself as a hero and no longer regrets it. Holding hands, they make a promise that this secret is only for the two of them. This is the end of episode 2. Continuing with episode 3, as usual, Blade was enjoying a large portion of curry. Arnest reminded him not to eat messily. Sophie then wiped Blade's mouth without hesitation, which made Arnest embarrassed. Thanks to the incident from yesterday, Claire and Jessica became closer to Arnest. They even wanted to have a meal together. Not only the two of them, but Kasim and Clay also joined for the meal. For some reason, the four of them were not wearing their usual uniforms. Jessica asked Blade for his opinion on her revealing outfit. Arnest then remembered that they had moved up to the top-ranked class starting today, so they were not wearing their usual uniforms. Blade commented that Jessica's outfit must be making her feel cold. Trying to seek attention, Leonard introduced himself to Claire and Jessica. Later, Arnest also remembered the news that the headmaster brought demon beasts to the school. However, Blade considered it a normal piece of news. Suddenly, all the students felt a strong tremor coming from nearby. It was probably caused by the demon beast they had just talked about. The demon beast that shook the school turned out to be a golden yellow dragon. The guards panicked and immediately called for the headmaster, as they believed only he could fight the dragon. Blade went to where the dragon was, holding a plate of curry in his hand. Fearlessly, Blade approached and jumped, knocking the dragon on the head to make it quiet. Other students were left speechless watching Blade defeat the dragon barehanded. Blade mentioned that the dragon was just a child and probably scared because it was brought here. He even offered his curry to the dragon. Blade then realized that the other students found it unbelievable that he could defeat the dragon. While still in confusion, the dragon behind Blade suddenly emitted a bright light and transformed into a human child. When Blade turned around, he was suddenly hugged by the child who called him father. Blade was unaware that the dragon had transformed into this child. Arnest kept telling him that the dragon had transformed, but Blade didn't believe it until Sophie said the same thing, which made him trust her instantly. Arnest got annoyed because Blade only believed it when Sophie said it. The child kept calling Blade father and asked to be hugged. He said he called Blade that way because his punch earlier was incredibly powerful. That night, Blade and the child were bathing together. The child informed Blade that her name was Chu Hullen and she wanted to know the meaning of that name. Blade replied that it was the name of a very strong warrior who always kept his promises. Shortly after, Arnest's voice was heard as she suddenly entered. She was embarrassed to see Blade bathing. She came to provide information about demon beasts, especially dragons. They were a species that sought power. When defeated, their bodies would perish, but a part of their soul wouldn't disappear. Instead, it would become a piece of information. Then, that soul would transform into another individual and mimic the appearance of the creature that defeated them. Blade began to understand why Chu transformed into a human child. Arnest learned that the child's name was Chu. Suddenly, Chu emerged from the curtain, revealing her naked body to Arnest. Arnest couldn't believe that Blade was bathing with a child, and she immediately kicked him in the face with all her strength. The next day, Arnest was still annoyed by Chu, who continuously stuck to Blade. Chu wanted Blade to feed her curry. She said she could eat on her own, but the food given directly by her father would taste much better. Not only that, Chu also informed Blade that every morning he should greet her with kisses. Later, Blade and the others were in the top-ranked class arena. Coincidentally, Blade saw Chu passing by, so he invited her to join the training. Chu happily approached him. Suddenly, Kasim, Clay, Claire, and Jessica approached Blade. They said the teacher gave an order to form groups. Since they had just entered the top-ranked class, they wanted to know more details about it first. Chu looked a bit down as she was no longer getting attention from Blade. Jessica mentioned that she specialized in espionage, so she asked for student recommendations to form a group. Blade suggested her to team up with Sophie, and the other three decided to group up with Blade. When Blade wanted to invite Chu to join as well, he realized Chu was no longer there. In the evening, Chu was walking around the school alone. She then saw the students from the lower-ranked class practicing. Those students noticed Chu coming again for the umpteenth time and invited her to join the practice too. However, Chu didn't respond and considered them unsuitable for her. She immediately ran off and coincidentally bumped into Blade. Chu said she was hungry. As usual, Blade invited her to have some curry. After eating to her heart's content, Chu fell asleep on Blade's bed while holding a doll. Then, Arnest knocked on the door of Blade's room, so they decided to talk outside. Blade explained that a dragon would be stepped on by its parents when it was born. If someone stronger than the dragon appeared, it would be considered as the dragon's parent. Since Chu considered Blade as her parent, she must have been alone since birth. Blade knew that they couldn't always act like a father and child, but if it wasn't like that, Chu would truly be alone. Arnest understood how heavy it was to always be alone, and she also understood Blade's feelings of wanting to take care of Chu. Arnest then called Sophie, who had been eavesdropping on them, and Sophie felt worried too. However, after listening to their conversation, she seemed to be calmer. When Blade returned to his room, Chu was no longer there, and the window was open. He finally found Chu daydreaming on the room's rooftop. Chu said she felt calm when looking at the moon. There were 2 moons in this world, one big and one small. Chu considered the big moon as her parent and the small one as her child. She always looked at that moon when she was still alone. Suddenly, Blade asked if Chu wanted to have friends. But Chu said that dragons didn't need to gather like humans. The next day, Blade went to the headmaster's office. Previously, he left Chu for a while in the care of the headmaster. It might not be the proper place, but only Blade and the headmaster could take care of Chu. However, Chu was not there at the moment. While taking care of Chu, the headmaster kept rubbing his head, which annoyed Chu because his beard poked her. Until evening, Blade still couldn't find Chu. When he wanted to enter his room, he heard Chu's voice from inside. Blade tried to peek a little, and he saw Chu playing with dolls. Upon closer inspection, 2 dolls she held resembled him and Arnest. But it wasn't just the 2 of them. Chu also had dolls of Sophie, Claire, Jessica, and even Leonard. What surprised Blade was that Chu also had dolls of students she didn't even know. Chu was acting with her dolls as if she had 108 friends. Blade then closed the door and stopped spying. He felt like he had failed because he didn't realize it earlier. When he passed by Arnest, Blade didn't respond and just walked with a gloomy expression. Suddenly, Blade slammed his head against the wall. Arnest didn't know what happened, but she tried to stop him. After calming Blade down, she asked for an explanation. Blade then revealed that Chu wanted to have friends, but his instinct was against it. A dragon couldn't acknowledge a creature weaker than itself. To be recognized as Chu's friend, the person had to defeat her first. Blade felt utterly useless. Arnest also understood that Blade couldn't do it alone, he should have asked for help from others. After all, Blade was willing to help Arnest before, so why didn't he seek help in return? Arnest felt it was unfair. The next day, Blade and Arnest went to the lower ranked class arena. Blade wanted to ask for their help to defeat Chu in a fight. At first, they were unsure if they could win against a dragon. However, Blade begged them, even prostrated himself, to become Chu's friend. Arnest also joined in pleading. Surprisingly, not only them, but all the students from the top-ranked class also came and begged for their help. Like Blade, they also cared for Chu. Seeing so many people pleading and prostrating themselves, the students from the lower-ranked class felt uneasy and finally decided to help. Some time later, all the students gathered in the arena to face Chu. Even the headmaster would be there to witness the battle from above the arena. He seemed very excited because he also wanted to have real training like that. However, his wife was doubtful if a dragon would admit defeat when fighting against so many humans. According to the headmaster, dragons considered humans as creatures that exerted their power in groups. For him, fighting in a group was not considered cowardly. The dragon thought the same way. Although the headmaster was enthusiastic about the fight, he was a little disappointed because he wouldn't see Blade in action. Of course, Blade wouldn't participate in the battle since he had already defeated Chu. Before the fight began, Blade tried to encourage Chu. He heard that Chu was trapped when captured before, so she didn't have a chance to fight properly. But this time, it was a fair fight. Blade wanted to show the true power of humans and also the true power of dragons. This is the end of episode 3. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss part 4 of this series recap.